There's now a way to contact the Wolf Connection podcast. Send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Calfa. Let's talk about some wolves. So very delighted to have from the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, in the Keweenaw Bay Indian community, the Natural Resource Department, Erin Johnston and Austin Ayres. Erin is a wildlife biologist and a wildlife and habitat section lead up there, and Austin is a wildlife technician, and he is a KBIC tribal member. Thank you both for joining us, taking the time out, dealing with the clocks moving forward and the time change and things like that. How are you both doing over there in Michigan today?
We're doing great. Thanks for having us.
Yep, doing well.
Good. Thank you guys. And we were trying to get the specifics before we started. And we'd love for the two of you just to really explain, I guess, the background and really how this works with the Keweenaw and the reservation itself. So I know, Austin, you were telling me that the reservation itself includes 59,000 acres of land. And are you guys watching over that in terms of, as biologists and wildlife technicians, how does that partnership work moving as it's been laid out?
So I guess as it pertains to natural resources, the entire western half of the UP is ceded territory. It's not technically reservation land, but that gives us full authority to be co-managers of that land. And so we do have a lot of partnerships, and maybe Erin can talk more about it with like the state and that, just to manage the land. But specifically for wolves and that, we have a new agreement with the state coming in where we'll be sharing all the information between each other with everything that they have from inside of our ceded territories. So
our natural resources department is, very similar to that of, a state agency, the DNR, or an environmental. So we have a number of different programs, not just the wildlife program. We have plants, native plant restoration, native plant restoration, invasive species, fisheries. We have a hatchery where we raise native fish for restoration efforts around here. Wetlands, water, air, brownfields. So we're looking at the landscape and all that's in it, and all the potential threats and challenges that come with being good stewards of the landscape.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you know about the treaty that established this reservation and the history of the land and its connection to the tribes?
Yeah, sure. So in 1842, the Treaty of La Pointe was signed, and that's what ceded the territory for, I believe, us, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. But there's tribes from all three of those states that had land ceded in that territory grab. And I think for us, it was Lance and Ontonagon bands they called us the Chippewa Indians. And those were the two that agreed to inhabit the Western UP. And those are their ancestral homelands. Like, this is, where my family's been for thousands of years. So, that 1842 Treaty of La Pointe established the ceded territory in those lands. But then in 1928, I think it was the Indian Reorganization Act, that sort of made it so that the government could recognize tribes as like entities of their own, essentially as governments, as nations within their own. And that is what established the actual Keweenaw Bay Indian community. The KBIC was formed from that. I think it was 1928. But yeah, before that, it was the Treaty of 1842, Treaty of La Pointe.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the Treaty of 1854. Did that not establish some of the reservation?
I think that's what, 54 just made the actual boundaries of the reservation and not just the ceded territory.
So to piggyback on that, I know both of you have your personal obligations to your work, but what is the tribal obligation to wildlife, or how is that embedded in the culture, in the history, or in the teachings?
I don't think it's a tribal thing. I think that it's a humanity thing. I think it's part of being like seeing yourself as an animal. And I think a lot of maybe tribal people or indigenous or aboriginal, however you want to refer to it, I think those people live in a way that just sort of connects them a little easier. There's not so much as a static. I like to call it a static. It's like, use all these electronics and stuff and all these signals and waves that you don't understand, but they're all flying past you. And so when you think about it in our connection to the land, like tribal people, it's more so just that we're not trying to be anything else other than, humans, animals, part of the earth. So
yeah, I think it's more about that connection and that relationship, right? So it's more about like Austin was just saying, recognizing that you live, on the land with all these things that are here with you, and not holding dominion over these things on the landscape, right? So we're working towards honoring those relationships, right, and that mutual respect, that, all these other things that are part of the land are giving to us, and, we owe them something to keep them on the landscape.
Right. Like no human truly owns land. Like we always, that's just an idea for us, right? Like we own the land. But animals don't see that. So it's like, that's how we always try to educate people. Mm-hmm. We own the land.
Do you guys feel that it's worked in your benefit, or worked really for the ecosystem and the reservation and the community's benefit, that this was established so long ago, and that it's really brought up as a teaching of a way to incorporate these teachings for everybody that comes in that's new, maybe that comes into the Natural Resource Department, and that they understand that this is really a more grounded approach as opposed to, say, governmental or federal, anything like that?
Right. So I guess I can speak to that as what I've noticed from state agencies and federal agencies is it's all about data, numbers, things you can see on a paper and put in a chart. That's really big for them. And it really just comes down to a numbers game. How do we maintain a population so that people aren't mad that they're gone or they're extinct? It's not really about the animals, their lives, or how they live. It's math and science, and those kind of get in the way of proper stewardship in my eyes, So with the tribe, it's, like you said, it's more of kind of a fundamental, basic, treat others how you want to be treated. That's really what we go by here, When we do any kind of survey or any kind of invasive whatever procedure or anything like that, we have to ask ourselves, what's the intention? What's the purpose? Are we really trying to help this animal and the way that they live, or are we really trying to just gather some data so that we can acquire more money, so that we can keep working, so that we can keep, it's because a lot of it's grant funded too. Mm-hmm. So the state and the federal agencies, they need those numbers. They need something hard proof to say, hey, we're doing something, we're getting something done, so we need more money to do it. And that's a lot of the bureaucracy of wildlife management. So,
and a lot of, I think, not to say that we're not also grant funded, because we are, our department is heavily grant funded, but I think the difference is maybe that we're seeking funds to kind of protect and honor those treaty resources and those treaty rights, and to make sure that tribal members still have access to,
our way of life.
Yeah, exactly. their way of life. And, and also that, the fish and the plants and the wildlife, all have that right to be on the landscape as well. And we all need clean water, and we all want clean air. And so, what does that look like, and how do we do that?
Can you describe the reservation aesthetically and ecologically? How would you describe the landscape, the habitats, what species live there?
Oh,
well, it's heavily forested. So we're in a very rural area. Let's see what else. I would say it's very biologically diverse.
Yeah.
I mean,
so I guess if you look at lists of places where there's lots of biodiversity, you'd probably find us on there somewhere. I know we're at this end of the southern range for boreal habitat, which is considered some of the most diverse habitat in the world, and based on some of our camera data and our surveys, I can prove that there's a lot of species that they say are endangered or technically missing from the area that still live here. We get all kinds of stuff. Last year we had boreal owls here, great horned owls. What was the other one we got that was kind of We had so many different owl
The boreal one
species.
was that that weirded you out.
and stuff you never expect to see, or like they've never been recorded here for like the last 20 years. So it's pretty diverse here, and it's pretty rare. We have fishers. Those are, people don't see those a lot. Pine martins, otters, beavers, muskrats. The bigger guys, we got wolves, black bears, deer. We even have woodchucks. we have some badgers. They're pretty rare, but we have badgers.
I think we're waiting for possums to make their arrival there. They haven't quite come this far north, but they're in the UP. They're just not this far north yet. But
way too many coyotes and raccoons. I mean, like every hardwood species of tree you can imagine. So,
it's an absolutely beautiful place.
And you can see through the water. So
clear, beautiful water. Yes.
I think we're gonna have to put that place on the map to go, Stephen.
Yes.
That sounds like an awesome area.
Yeah.
I want to know, is there any relationship or communication? Because you stated in the beginning when we were talking about the treaty and how it helped with the tribes, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Are there conversations between your departments, your communities about what's been happening ecologically and how you guys work together to try and help with state and federal actions as it comes to not just wolves, but wildlife in general and taking care of the ecosystem? Because I know when we spoke to a bunch of the individuals in Wisconsin, there was somewhat of a separation between the tribes that were in the northern part of Wisconsin that really held the wolves in high regard, as opposed to those who are more towards the center and the southern part of the state. So what's that communication like, if there is any at all?
Yeah, there definitely is communication. So there's these kind of overarching entities that kind of support tribal interests. So like CORA, which is the Chippewa Otter Resource Authority, and they provide some support to a group of tribal nations. And there's Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, which KBIC is a part of that. And then there's 1854 Treaty Authority. There's the Boyd Task Force. So there's a lot of these kind of, I don't know if you want to call them blanket organizations, if they want to define that kind of help to bring tribes together and bring those conversations to the table and have that interaction with leadership, but also, with staff like Austin and I, have that interaction with other natural resources departments. I guess one thing is not every tribe has a department, that is maybe as robust as others. Yeah. And so not, it might just be their leadership participating in a lot of things. It might not be environmental or natural resource staff. And so I think sometimes, tribes have additional hurdles, I think, to get over to participate.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about like communication, like in the differing ideas and like philosophies. It's more like just they don't have the department like we might or some other people might. Here in Michigan, at least, we're kind of like known as like the tribal natural resource agency. There's a lot of others that are growing and stuff, but our fish hatchery's been around for 20 plus years, and it's one of the most successful. And that's like one of the main drives here. But yeah, there is difference in communications, especially between like we went and worked with people in Minnesota who have very differing opinions about how to treat the wolves than we do. So it comes down to, again, like she said, the leadership. A lot of those people end up on those meetings, but they got a million hats to wear. So they're not necessarily so determined to say, this is what we need to do. And as like for tribal nations, part of that should be like they need to step back and find somebody like an expert like Erin. Erin's not a tribal member, but this is our expert. This is who we trust. This is our wildlife biologist. Like she makes the recommendations, we follow them. And that's for, setting hunting, harvesting limits in that and everything else you can imagine for management practices. So I think like the communication thing, it's there, but it's still like everybody's different. When you think of tribal nations, like every single tribal nation is its own nation. And, there's lots of stuff about like how we're peace-loving people and that. It's true. We do love peace, but like we're all different nations. We used to go to war all the time. Like people don't talk about the Anishinaabe are like the greatest warrior race ever the Ojibwe, they inhabit all the Great Lakes because we conquered it. Yeah, so there's differing opinions and differing stories and differing traditions. So like the communication's not always there. Because I did see some stuff from southern Wisconsin tribes that I was like, it's not what we think up here. So
wow. So what is the current state of wolves on the reservation now? I mean, paint a picture for us of numbers and packs or management goals.
So I guess in general, KBIC, so the 1842 treaty territory and the reservation. So the Western UP is, kind of where a lot of the wolves in Michigan are. So they're across the entire Upper Peninsula, but I would say central to Western UP is, where majority of the packs are. And, we've been monitoring wolves on and near the reservation since like the middle 2005, somewhere in there.
It says 2007 in our report,
so
but
2007. Okay.
But it's like 2005.
Kind of when our wildlife program started to kind of really pick up and build, which was before my time here. You were in the hatchery for a while. And so most of that work has been, through remote camera data. We're working on building a collaring program right now, but we do not collar wolves right now. The state of Michigan does. So, I mean, I would say we have a healthy,
I'd say we have a very healthy population. Yeah. And if you look at maps of wolf range, like we're in one of those special areas of the U.S. where there's wolves actually, and it's very easy to tell, I'd say we actively monitor probably 6 to 7 packs a year, just depending on who's taking over what territory and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're mostly within the reservation, but obviously wildlife does not acknowledge political boundaries. Yeah. So they go where they please and where they choose. And like Austin just said, I think we pick up a number of the packs on and near the reservation. And it's helped us kind of better understand their interactions and kind of see where there could be potential for conflict.
Yeah.
And just, monitor to see, what areas of the reservation or around the reservation that they're using. So that helps us, better maintain the landscape to keep them here because that's important to us.
Yeah. Are there any denned up on the reservation? Semi-permanent?
Yes. Yeah? Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We have one that's like smack dab in the middle. So we call that one our pack. It's like our and there's actually data out there to support that. Like every reservation or at least ceded territories where natives live, like there's wolves there because there's like a natural barrier basically that the native people have always like supported the life of other species. And there's studies out there. I mean, I got this book right here that I was going to recommend you guys. Probably have read it. Predatory Bureaucracy. It's kind of grim. There's a lot of dark stuff in here, but it talks a lot about how perception rules management and perception rules, like, especially over predators, how we treat it. Like people just get lost and all that. So,
no, I mean, I've done the reading of a lot of dark books so far.
Especially whatever that not the last one. What was the?
Well, Carter Niemeyer's books were pretty. What was it? John T. Coleman's
that
book.
One was different.
That's what it was. Hang on, Vicious. That was a dark one for me. I was like, oof, there's a lot of bad stuff going on there. I want to just not even step back, but I guess circle in with this. What is Austin, if you can speak to it, and Erin, if you can jump in too, what are the different ways of thinking? Because you mentioned that not every tribe or community might think the same way. Are there overarching views that are more precarious, I would say, for predators that are there on the landscape? Or is everyone mostly on the same level of understanding? Like you said, there's a natural barrier. The tribes and the communities are there so that the resources and the everything can coexist as best as possible. So is there anything that's, anywhere that may deviate from that slightly? If you can say or not, I don't know.
I know it's hard to speak for all tribal people. For the Anishinaabe, we have like a story about the wolf being our brother, and that's like a big thing. And so most Anishinaabe, which is, the 3 tribes of Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa, like those all 3 of those should really have a reverence for the wolf. But because of colonization, because of westward expansion, all that, a lot of people lost their stories. Not a lot of them were written down. And a lot of those traditions get kind of lost. And then with assimilation, our culture was kind of, I wouldn't say like taken away, but it was diminished in a way that, you know, we were forced to be more European and forced to be more Asian, even in certain places, and everything like that. So a lot of people care more about money, and there's money in hunting, and there's money in selling tickets to harvest. And I think that some tribes probably take that advantage of that. And, you know, in certain areas, there's tribes where they weren't necessarily given land like we have here. Like the land that the reservation is on here is very special. Like we talked about the diversity. There's certain tribes, other places where they don't have access to natural resources in any way. And so they have kind of walked away from that path of life and are more focused on monetary things. Like, you know, you see lots of things about casinos. You should know that the first native casino ever founded was here in our tribe. The first ever one came from here. And then all the other tribes started doing it because they said, oh, we can do that. But there also came a problem out of that lots of tribes became obsessed with money, obsessed with making their people richer through monetary value, which is a very individualistic approach. It's kind of abandoning like the family value, the traditional value, even like respecting the animals. So, you know, that's one of the reasons that people and tribes have different opinions on this, is because everybody's had a different experience since, I guess you could call it arrival. Since arrival, like everybody's experience has been different. There's some people that never had to fight. There's some people that, you know, we had grandpas who would tell us that, you know, like, oh, you're going to have to fight the white man again someday. Like, you're going to have to fight the white man again someday. It's coming. Like, there's people like that. You know, it's fear, it's greed. So that's what kind of distorted all the feelings about natural resources for most of the tribes being similar, I think.
So, Erin, for you coming into this, because how long have you been with the Natural Resources Department?
I have worked with the Natural Resource Department for 11 years, but I've worked for the tribe for 13.
Wow. So for you, as I don't want to say an outsider, but at this point you've been there for over a decade. How were you able to assimilate, it seems like so seamlessly, into this conversation, this history, and this being able to be you're the steward. Austin pointed to you and said, we follow Erin's guidance.
Have you done this?
Yeah. No, but how did that all come to be and come to pass, and you've been there for as long as you've been there?
I guess a lot of it has to do with just like, this is my passion, right? So when I was growing up, I always loved the outdoors and animals. And when I went to college, I knew I wanted to do something dealing with natural resources, and just kind of, this is where I ended up. And, you know, there's times where I sit down and think, okay, if I, you know, couldn't be a wildlife biologist, or I couldn't work in natural resources, like, what would I do? And I'm like, I can't really come up with anything else. It's just something I care very much about. And I don't know, I guess I just got lucky to find a job working for an agency or for, you know, a community that, you know, held those same values. And so I think it just kind of fits.
Yeah.
Because
I think we recognize like-minded people.
Yeah.
And it's not, you know, there is this big thing about like race. But I don't think it's about that ever, especially in natural resources. It's more about, you know, people that care, people that recognize like there's something going on, and humans are a big part of what's going on, and we got to do something about it. And I think that could be a big push for like society to move away from like race, everything, you know?
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
Yeah. Speaking of that, like-mindedness, do you guys feel like are you on an island in the Upper Peninsula, or are you among a lot of other groups that think like you do? What's the general perspective in the part of Michigan that you guys are from on wolves?
On wolves.
I think the general public here in the UP does not like wolves. And I think a lot of that comes from fairy tales, movies, all that, because there's no real statistics to say that wolves are dangerous to humans at all. I mean, like, I got them all written right here just in case, you know. And it's something that I bring up to people a lot is like, it's a psychological thing that you've been convinced that wolves are extremely dangerous to humans and all this other stuff. So I forgot the question. Sorry. But.
No, well, and this state is actually, they should be publishing soon, maybe their report on their public attitude survey towards wolves, and it'll be interesting to see. But I mean, majority of the state does not have wolves. It is really just the people in the Upper Peninsula that are having these interactions with wolves. And you could probably live here in the UP your whole life and never see one.
Yeah.
Or you could, live here and have a negative encounter, or you could live here and have an amazing encounter.
Right.
I guess it's all about maybe, what you've been conditioned to think about wolves or feel about towards wolves, and that attitude of, is it the big bad wolf, or is it this, amazing apex predator that helps maintain the health of an ecosystem? Or is it just, this charismatic megafauna that,
right.
Is the symbol of wild? And,
right.
I think there's that it really runs the spectrum of feelings and attitudes towards
right.
wolves.
And we have like a really ancient relationship with wolves. So that's like, that's our connection to all other animals right there. So I think that with like the coming of more modern technology and like, seeing virtual worlds and all this stuff now, I think people are kind of like forgetting that old ancient tie to like our natural order. And it's like, it's really in the wolf. So like when people abandon that truly and say, the wolf's evil, they're kind of calling themselves evil. Because like in our creation story, it's like, we're brothers to the wolves, we're brothers to all of creation. So like, if something's going wrong with creation, that means like something's going wrong with us. So yeah, that's why we're the stewards, we have to be the ones that give them the voice. And
yeah, it's actually interesting. I mean, I guess we knew, right, that a lot of tribal communities, they did pass down stories about wolves being brothers and relatives, and they have just a totally different perspective of what a human is in the midst of natural life, wildlife. And now hearing, you speak on it and then thinking, well, this can't really be a coincidence. It just feels like those stories that we hear as kids, we kind of just brush them off. They're kind of just default stories, but it makes me feel like they're way more important than we're giving them credit, and they have way more of an impact, at least just storytelling in general, that the telling of these stories, as small as they might seem when they're being told over generations and generations of time, they add up to real life, tangible effects for animals.
Yeah. So actually, we call ourselves like oral historians, right? So nothing was ever written down. Well, there's some stuff that's written down, but lots of the stories are never written down. And part of the reason they're not written down is because they're supposed to be about interpretation. They're supposed to be about the person who's hearing them. There's supposed to be a lesson there for you, you know what I mean? So like, I'll just tell like a simplified version of the creation story. So in the beginning, there's nothing. And Creator takes, the four elements, fire, water, wind, earth, puts them all together and breathes into it. And from this creation, there's like a woman. And this woman would create a man. And that man would be Wanabuju. And Wanabuju would be given a task by Creator to go see all the things on earth, name it all. Because Creator had put everything there already. He put man there last. And so this person, Wanabuju, goes and walks the earth, sees everything, starts naming it all, giving everything, their own little traits, telling stories to himself about what they do and why they do it, learning from the animals. And then finally, Wanabuju got kind of tired and irritated, as all humans do, and was like, what's the deal? Like started yelling at the sky, basically saying, why am I here alone? What's going on? There's all these other animals have a partner and they all can make, more animals and they can do this thing. And what the hell's going on? Why can't I do that? And so Creator, instead of sending a woman or another person, sent Maingan, the wolf, and told Wanabuju that you and Maingan have to walk now. Go and see all the things that you have named and go and tell all the stories to Maingan, and Maingan will share stories with you of what they've seen. And so they walked the earth and did all that again together. And they got back to the same spot where they originally met. And Creator came back through the sky and, said, hey, you got to separate now. You're going to walk different paths, but you're forever going to be living the same lifestyle. You're going to be disrespected. You're going to be feared. You're going to be misunderstood. You're going to be hunted for your hair. You're going to have your lands taken. You're going to not be able to hunt where you used to hunt. And then sent us on our own paths and told us, to forever remember our connection, that, wolves would remember us as animals too, and we would remember ourselves as animals too, and part of creation, all tied together in that way. And really the big idea, I guess I can't even tell you though, because it's up to your interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
Like I was saying, like these stories are about your interpretation and like what you can learn from them. For me, the interpretation was that, like, holy shit, like everything we're all just stuck on this rock. Like in natural resources, there's this phrase, invasive species. Yeah. It's all from Earth. Mm-hmm. It's all from Earth. And so like, that's something that, we need to take a step back. And like, part of that story too is like naming all the animals, labeling things, putting them in a box basically, which is something we still do. And I think that's maybe something we should stop doing, especially in resource management. And maybe we need to stop calling it resource management.
Sure. So speaking of that, actually, that brings up an interesting point. When there is a new species of either animal or plant or something showing up on your land and it's changing the landscape rapidly, how do you deal with that, in conjunction with your perspective of the concept of invasive species, of course?
Yeah, so right now it kind of depends on what it is and what type of, negative impact it's having or not having. Right. So first, we just kind of try to assess the situation, like where is it, what's it doing, how much is there, what do we know about this plant or animal, and if there is some type of a measure taken to remove, control, it typically is like just manual removal. We're not big on using chemicals really anywhere on the reservation for anything like that. Just we are such a water-rich community. There's just, we don't want to be putting anything on the landscape that's not natural.
Yeah. But, like our watersheds all run into the largest supply of fresh water in the world. So, removing them by hand is tedious and stuff. And that's like another thing about the philosophy of like different views. Yep. If it was up to me, I don't think we would do that. But I'm not in charge. So
I'm still reflecting on the story. So I'm trying to get my interpretation in my head. I want to go back to Erin. You were talking about this state, and I know we're kind of bouncing around, but I love doing this stuff. You were saying that the state of Michigan is going to come down with the survey, I guess the public survey of how they feel. And I know I looked at an article that you had made some comments in. It's in the Daily Mining Gazette, and you said basically this. I'm just quoting from here, that we're having conversations with the state of Michigan and building that relationship. I think a lot of the time there's more commonality than we realize, but it takes that willingness to come to the table and have those conversations and see each other as co-stewards of this landscape. Do you feel with, and when we were speaking over email, that, you guys were not present for any of the conversations about possibilities of wolf hunts? They never came to be, never came to pass. Do you feel that the state is really coming to the table, as you said, and starting to have these conversations about co-stewardship? Is really the question I was getting at.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a tricky question. I kind of, it kind of seems like, things could always be better, right? With state agencies, with federal agencies. So, they have their politics and their policies and their processes. And I think just in the 11 years that I've worked here, I think I have seen some really amazing forward progress and interactions between states and tribes. I can't say that everything's great and that, we always agree. And even, every tribe is different, like Austin was saying, right? So, sometimes there's this tendency to try to lump all the tribes together and say, well, you guys all just get together and pick like one person to be your representative. And so that kind of is frustrating in a number of ways. And one, because it's really just not acknowledging, that each nation is a sovereign nation and should be treated as such. They were gonna revise their wolf management plan. They were going to do another public attitude survey for the state of Michigan, and they were going to bring back their wolf advisory council. And so they kind of had this process in these boxes that they were going to check. And, they held pretty firm that, they weren't going to make any rash decisions. They weren't going to talk about hunting. Those decisions weren't going to be made until all these other things, were taken care of. And so, I think a lot of times if we can keep our interactions at the staff level, if it's just like our wildlife staff talking to their local wildlife staff, things are, I would say, pretty darn good.
Yeah.
It's when, the higher up you go, the more political you get. And then that's when you maybe start to run into a little bit of trouble.
To that point, Erin mentioned earlier about how Michigan, everything's handled in Lansing.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have any wolves downstate. So there's this real tricky thing in Michigan with the state where all the laws are made 500 miles away. It's an 8-hour drive to get there. But you come up here, it's a completely different world. The people don't even identify as Michigan people. They identify as Yoopers, like we said. So it makes it really strange though for management.
And a lot of the natural resource issues that we have, sometimes we relate more to Wisconsin and Minnesota than we do to the lower peninsula because of it's just very different. It's more populated and there's just a lot more going on downstate. And it's, sometimes with wild rice, for example, we look a lot to Wisconsin and Minnesota when we're talking about wild rice restoration and monitoring and, research around maintaining wild rice on the landscape. Just because, it's even a different species of wild rice down downstate than it is here. So there's a lot of interesting, I guess.
There's a lot less trees. There's a lot less hills and mountains. Mm-hmm. So it's just different. It's more farmland, and that leads to a lot different view on management and all that, and conservation in general. Yeah. So it leads to less animals, less forests. So there's a big gap there. But with our local people, it's been great.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
Brad Johnson.
We talk regularly, and
just should name drop.
We talk regularly, and Austin, I think, mentioned earlier that we've had some conversations about working together for monitoring the wolves. We follow the same protocol, so why duplicate effort when we can work together and we can share data and information, as long as it's understood that what we share is with the state and does not go, outside of that without our written consent, and kind of the same thing, we honor that and anything that they would share with us as well. So I think we're working towards that. I think, again, the different issues I've dealt with since I've worked here with KBIC, I used to be in the Lake Superior program. So dealing a lot with, just anything dealing with Lake Superior, invasive species, pipelines, mining, all that kind of stuff. So I think one thing about KBIC is, I feel like we are a tribe that's willing to come to the table and have those conversations. And there's other maybe agencies or organizations that don't want to have those. They don't want to talk to. But to me, it's if you don't speak up, then assumptions are made. And when assumptions are made, it usually doesn't come out well. People usually assume the negative. Oh, they won't talk, so that must mean they don't support this, or they feel differently, and that's not always the case. I think, you're not always going to leave the table agreeing. I think that's one thing, is we're not always going to agree. We're KBIC, I feel pretty confident in saying KBIC is never going to support wolf hunting.
Yeah.
So we're never going to come to the table and leave in an agreement on that.
Yeah.
So once we get that out of the way, it's okay, how do we move forward from there? That doesn't mean conversation has to stop. Well, we don't agree. We can't talk anymore. No. Okay. Yeah. What can we talk about? How can we work together? What can we share?
So what is it that they're requesting? That I'm just trying to clarify the conversations you're speaking of there. What are they requesting that wolf hunting be allowed on the reservation?
So I nothing related to hunting has been requested right now. So I will speak for, I guess, what happened in the past. So the last time, or I guess 2 times ago now, that wolves were delisted. So back in that 2011 to 2013, 14, I think so it was like 2012. Some of the Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan had the opportunity that they could have a hunting or trapping season for wolves. And Michigan did not right away. But then I don't want to say, eventually they did. I don't remember if it was 2013, right before they put them back, they relisted them. They had a hunting season. And that hunting season was basically by lottery. Well, it wasn't really lottery. They sold 1,200 permits. The limit was 42. So they sold 1,200 hunting licenses, but only 42 wolves could be taken.
I see. I thought you meant the bag limit per individual is 42. I'm like,
little
the entire world.
No, we would have 0 wolves left.
So basically,
it was money, and they were like $100 a pop.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of money to be made in the state. And so how it worked was you had to call in if you harvested a wolf within so many hours, so that they could make sure they didn't exceed their quota. And in setting that up, how things work in Michigan, they have like management units. So there's deer management units. Well, they set up wolf management units. So it wasn't open hunting across the whole UP. There were 3 designated units. And one of those units happened to encompass a portion of the reservation. And, the tribe came forward. They asked that there not be, hunting allowed on the reservation, acknowledging this area as a no hunting zone. And basically that was denied. It was ignored. I wasn't here at that time. I don't know the exact conversations, but essentially, that was pretty tough. And, I don't know whether or not any wolves were harvested, within the bounds of the reservation. They ended up only, I think by the time the season closed, I think only 22 wolves were registered. So, they didn't meet the bag limit, the quota, I should say, the quota. I'm using all kinds of random words, but they didn't, hit the quota. But I think the frustrating part was the lack of communication and the lack of respect for tribal lands being off limits to hunting. And so moving forward, if there's conversations in the future, if wolves are delisted again and these conversations come back up, I guess we'd like to have these conversations now, maybe, just to make sure that that doesn't happen again, right? So that, at least for KBIC, again, we can't speak for the other tribes, how they would like their lands acknowledged or what protections they would like to see for wolves. One, we just don't want to see any hunting at all. But if political pressures be what they are and something happens, then, we at least need to be part of that conversation of how that would happen. I say that because I don't want to say hunt, but how that would happen.
Can tribal members hunt on the reservation? No. So there's no hunting of deer or
we make our own laws. We have our own jurisdiction. Our council, our president would never allow that just because of our cultural significance. And we also just recognize them as like a extremely valuable predator. We manage the land and the deer population in a certain way, and so do they. They manage beavers too, so, and that's, I listened to you guys' last podcast with the guy talking about beaver, or it wasn't the last one, it was the Voyager's wolf guy.
Voyager, yeah.
And he talked about beavers. And that's something I try to explain to people. I'm like, we get calls about people, I got this beaver on my property, and he's making this dam, and then we got to go remove him and replace him somewhere else. And it's like, and then in the same breath, while we're there, they're like, yeah, I seen wolves too. I was going to shoot them. And I'm just like, the wolves are here to eat your beaver. Like, I'm sorry. Yeah, that sounds crazy. I just said that, but I'm like, that's what they're here to do. So,
well, I was actually just listening to 2 podcasts ago about like the wolves out west with Dan McNulty.
Yeah.
And talking about like they're upset because there's too many elk, so they need to reduce the elk, but then they're also killing wolves and cougars, and you're like, you're killing the predators that are helping you maintain lower levels of these ungulates that are impacting the landscape.
This book right here, The Wolves of Isle Royale.
Yeah.
That's perfect for like looking at, if wolves go away, what can big, large, the herbivores do to a certain place. And
but I think that goes to speaking about what is the actual purpose of wolf hunting.
Right.
And it really seems more about sport than about, you're not going to eat it.
Right.
So, and you just, so, okay, maybe we're doing it because they're having too much an impact on X, Y, and Z. But then, this information coming from Dan out west is like, oh, no, it's really the opposite. And then talking about chronic wasting disease, that's a real concern for us here in the Upper Peninsula. We have it basically coming at us from both directions. It's in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. It's in Wisconsin. It's right over the border. And, our deer here in the Western UP move around in the wintertime. Like they go to their wintering yards. So they go on these little, small migrations to their wintering yards. And some of those are on the border of Wisconsin. Yeah. So all it takes is,
there's a national forest right there. So it's like a highway for deer.
Just a few sick deer interacting with some healthy ones. And suddenly, CWD's in the UP and we've got a bigger problem. Because once it's here, it's not going anywhere. So there's a lot of different things, going on, and
wolves are also just a co-steward. That's they always try to hammer that point home, like education. Yeah. Wolves are co-stewards.
And predators are, I guess. Just predators.
Yeah.
In general.
Yes. Yep. And that label can kind of put fear in people's hearts. That word predator. So it's like but if you just have an understanding of what's going on, makes it a lot easier not to be scared. So education, always.
No, that's a good word to use, is co-steward, I think, too. I think if you said that about the bears and the mountain lions and all the other apex predators that people are afraid of, so to speak, or they don't understand the impact that they have when they're gone. I think, that's a way to put that circle in a square, maybe for some people to understand that's how that works. With all of this conversation going back and forth, with the wolves getting relisted on the endangered species list, I know that affected you guys more so than it really didn't affect the wolves out west. And that's where if you listen, we talked to Dan about that, and he was like, it doesn't really affect anything in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, but I know they got relisted for Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, and I think the 44 other states, the 40 states that they're not, there's no wolves in Florida, but they're on the list, I guess. So, how does that affect you guys in the work that you do and the education that you guys do and trying to drive that stewardship home?
I don't know that it really changes anything. I think we're still moving forward with.
The federal management plan says that management practices return to the feds. They're taken away from the state and the tribes, but we don't really see any federal management of wolves in the UP, at least. And if you're going to consider federal, whatever that means, that we're federal. So, all of our money's federal to do all this work. So technically nothing's changed for us. It's just on paper, it doesn't look like we can do anything about it. Mm-hmm. But, like I said before, what's the intention? Are we really altering the way wolves live, or are we just trying to assist them so that they can continue to support the way that they live? And, in that way, I think being put on the Endangered Species Act or the list is that's the way to do it. Because then people will probably feel less inclined to shoot them or trap them or do whatever because they think, got to kill the wolves. There's too many of them. And I hear all kinds of crazy stuff, just in person from all of our local hunters and people that say there's no deer because they get ate by all the wolves, and then I can show them a predator-prey study that says, wolves are the fourth predator for the white-tailed deer here in the UP, the fawns. So, but, it doesn't matter to them because it's like they have anecdotal evidence, they have whatever. They have the childhood stories of Red Riding Hood and all that. So
I think, if we want to do more hands-on work with wolves, obviously putting them back on the federal list invokes some more hoops to jump through of if you want to handle an endangered species. So, I mean, there's that. It would probably involve more permits and conversations with the Fish and Wildlife Service on the type of work we want to do and why we want to do it and things like that. But I think in terms of our monitoring and our relationship with the state or our interactions, I mean, we're still chugging forward, as we're kind of revising our wolf, stewardship plan. And obviously we have to take into consideration, this change in status all the time, and have to consider that and the work that we do and the documents that we put out too, to say, well, when there are, I think no matter what, there's always federal protections because KBIC will always protect the wolf, right? Yeah. So whether the Fish and Wildlife Service says otherwise, or the ESA list said otherwise, or the state says otherwise, KBIC is always going to protect Miangan.
Do you anticipate any expansion of wolf populations to any meaningful degree, or because of the nature of wolves and their territorial behavior, even if people are not hunting them, you'll just find that they maintain the population as it is, or at least in the ballpark?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to keep on the way they are in the Upper Peninsula. There's even some work to show that there's viable habitat for them in the northern Lower Peninsula. So, if there was opportunity for them, to jump in a car and cross the bridge or, walk across the ice, there's ways, they have had a couple wolves show up in the northern lower, mistaken as coyotes and things like that. Yeah. So it's not to say that there's not more viable habitat for them. I think, where the conversation is going now, or what people are more upset about, is more like the social carrying capacity of wolves versus the ecological carrying capacity of wolves. And I think ecologically, I know we probably haven't met the carrying capacity for the number of wolves that could be on the landscape. But
I guess it could double.
You think that much?
I think it could double, but I don't think it will. I don't think it will, just because of human expansion. I think Michigan's statistic for the UP says it's maintained around like 650 to 750 for the past 5 years since their last hunt, at least. So that might be 7 years. And I mean, Wisconsin had their wolf hunt where they went way over their biological limit that they set. But it's like they clearly had a population that maintained for long enough for them to say, let's just go all out and shoot 200 plus wolves. Let's do it.
Well, I don't think there's anything biological about the way they did their,
but they have to follow.
But
they gotta follow their rules. Yeah.
So they have legislation in place that mandates that type of, mandates a wolf hunt. Michigan, thankfully, does not have that, and I hope they never do.
Yeah, same here. What do you think what do you think the community and the Natural Resources Department's strength is in terms of the outreach? Because all the things that you two have said to us today really strike a chord, at least for me, and a different way of promoting wolves as a partner in this situation, and just for general nature and natural resource stewardship. So what's the key for you all as you go forward with into 2022 and beyond about keeping natural resources a viable thing for humans to understand that we need this stuff?
Well, obviously education is like a huge thing. Obviously, we know all kinds of stuff about these animals. We understand their place, but this is because this is what we do. This is our passion. And so just to be able to bring that to the people in a way that they understand that, like, we're coming from a place of love, not from a place of like, it's hard to say because like there's a lot of people in the world that are like, oh, we got to save the animals. We got to save the animals. And then when you ask them why, it's like, Oh, it's because I love them, because I love animals. Well, who cares that you love animals? That they don't love you, I promise you that. It's like they're their own being, their own person, their own whatever, you know. It's like I'm assigning them sort of human qualities right now, but like they have personality, you know. You can go in the woods and interact with an animal and like just see that the way that they are. Some animals are brave, some are scared, some are lazy and don't care. You could walk right past them and they'll just like they'll look at you for a split second and just keep walking like nothing's there.
Well, I think with education for Austin, you know, he's really looking at the youth.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, we got these like, you know, these people who have already been exposed to all the things, and you know, their mind may be pretty set on how they feel or don't feel about certain things.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, you know, I think our approach now is like, all right, let's get into the schools. Let's get into our youth programs. Let's take advantage of other opportunities where there's activities at the local library. And like, how can we have these conversations, you know, with those younger generations to kind of instill that in them so that they can then go home and talk about it, or that they can, you know, carry that message forward and hopefully, you know, maybe come work for us someday or work for another agency someday, and, you know, have that knowledge and feel that certain way about, you know, nature and wildlife, and, you know, have those different connections.
Right. So just like we get in the classroom a lot. I mean, we go from like kindergarten to we've been in college. We've done, you know, graduate level philosophy class courses where we talk about this kind of stuff. So just teaching people that kind of, and like sharing our mentality. Because, you know, I talked about like the storytelling earlier, is like everything that I say and do is like, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm just telling them what I believe to be true and like what I've seen, what I know from my experiences, and just letting them interpret it and like letting them see how I feel and like letting them trying to understand how I feel and why I feel that way. So I you know, it's big on education for the kids. So
I think getting into, you know, like Austin was just mentioning, college classes too. So, I mean, when I went through undergraduate, you know, there were no courses or lessons about other ways of managing or being stewards of. It was all about like natural resource management, and here's your textbook, and here's how we do it, and we count animals and
all the Leopold,
tag ears, and we do all this stuff, right? There was nothing about like those interactions and those relationships, and you know, there was, you know, just nothing really about that, and then or about human dimensions either. About, you know, when you get into natural resource management, you know, Austin kind of mentioned this in the beginning, you're dealing with people all the time. You're basically managing stuff for people.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like you said, people want to hunt deer, so we care about deer because people want to eat them. So we gotta figure out how many are out there, and like, you know, that's like your standard management, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, one, that have the formal training in this way, don't have that human dimensions training either, to like interact with people.
They don't understand what they're even trying to do or maintain.
Yeah.
They're just like, think it's a job. They can work outside and do all this stuff. That's like, what it seems like.
I sit inside a lot. I talk to a lot of people.
Yeah. Erin has her headphones on most of the day.
Yeah. So. Listening to
Biologist.
Well, I mean, we went to, you know, just, so my background in my master's was human dimensions. Like I surveyed deer hunters. Like people were my subjects, and it was about chronic wasting disease and support for different management for, you know, trying to control CWD on the landscape in Wisconsin. You know, and I've been to public meetings since then, or, you know, and there's certain stakeholders in a room together, and, you know, this meeting in particular was about wolves, and it got really heated, and there was a lot of negative things getting said. Not a whole lot of, you know, things that had really substantiated. And, you know, I'm sitting there getting red, and I'm like upset, and I can't believe these people are saying these things. But, you know, I took a lot of notes, and I typed them up afterwards, and then I read through them, and I calmed down, and I was like, you know, we can really read between the lines on here and see what's really going on. And sometimes it's not necessarily that they're angry at wolves or they want wolves dead. It's like there's a disconnect between the stakeholder groups and the managers. Right. They don't feel heard. And what happens when people don't feel heard? I don't know if you guys have kids, but when my kids don't feel heard, they just get louder. They just get louder and they throw tantrums and they, and to get heard. And sometimes, the loudest, craziest things being said are, what gets heard. And that's unfortunate. So I think a lot of it also has to do with just, being educators, reaching out, trying to have these conversations, working with people to have a different perspective, but also hearing, you really got to sit down and listen and hear what, you're not going to change the mind of a farmer who's lost multiple cattle to depredation, whether it was a wolf or not. Right. That impacted their livelihood. And so that's different. Right. There's some people who just don't like wolves because they don't like wolves because of whatever stories. Yes, they've been conditioned in that way. And then there are truly people who have had negative interactions that has influenced. And, you're not going to necessarily, change that. And you really, I don't know if you should try. Because then you're kind of discounting that experience, right? And you're saying, well, that doesn't.
You're basically telling them that didn't happen.
Yeah, and it did, and that's not. That's not fair either. So, I think then that goes back to just like being willing to be part of the conversation, as long as the other people are willing to hear you as well. I think that's important. That there's that reciprocity of like, I have something to say too, and I want to be heard too, and I'm willing to listen to what you have to say and figure out how we can work together.
Yeah, it's definitely hard, I think, for biologists or people that some might consider to be pro-wolf to be out there trying to tell a rancher why they're wrong, like you're stating. And we noticed that the best person to talk to any group is a person from that group who's had a successful story or has figured out some way to manage it. I mean, we've talked to a few ranchers who, they've had problems with wolves, but they've also come up with viable solutions that are sustainable. And those folks telling another rancher who's had a bad experience, or even one that's just afraid of having a bad experience, and they're, them taking such a hit that they can't, pass on their operation to their kid or something like that. There's a lot of historical and, familial relations happening here. It's not, like you said, it's not necessarily just about wolves. So, we definitely hope that folks hear our podcast and other ranchers who have had successful stories where they've figured out some kind of solution can share their experience, because I think that's the only thing that we've seen so far that seems to work.
Yep, absolutely.
And you guys have done tremendous work in your just alone what you guys are doing and preaching that, like you say, that reciprocity and reaching across the aisle or the table, whatever it may be, to talk to others that have different opinions and being willing to listen. I think being able to listen, as we've all said here, is the biggest tool that we all need to have. Is just being able to listen, take the notes, and see how we can meet and be, have a joint, goal to be able to make this all work. My last question for both of you before I ask, because we want to promote, the KBIC where everybody can find all the information. So my question for both of you is, when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
Mishame. It means my older brother. Yeah, just our brother. For me, big time was just brother. Like, I understand my place on the landscape, and I don't know. We live in a world where everybody has a choice. You get to walk a path, and you get a choice. It splits, and so you can choose the road that's a little bit grosser and grown over, whatever you want to call it, however people think, or you can choose the shiny metal paved, whatever. And it's like, people got to make that choice. That's, that's what the wolf represents to me, is like a choice. A choice to walk the path. There you go.
Love it.
I think my reaction is less profound. I just get excited. I know a lot of people, you hear wolf and it strikes maybe fear, but I'm like, I get excited, and it was one reason, that I came to the UP for school, and it was one of my first really exciting wildlife encounters moving to the UP from the Lower Peninsula. Like, I still remember like where I was, what I was doing the first time I ever, encountered wolves. And I just, there's just this, it was like a sign to me that like, this was the right choice. I was supposed to come to the UP and to be at school here and learn these things and then, end up staying here and finding a job here. So I don't know why. There's that every time there's, people say, oh, like, what's your favorite animal or what? Right. I'm like, oh, this, that, but I don't know. There's just something about wolves that I'm drawn towards. So
tell everybody, both of you, either of you, whoever wants to take the lead, just where they can see all the information, learn the history too about the KBIC, and so they can get a better grasp on what.
Yeah, and just in case any tribal members are listening to this from KBIC, I'm sorry if I got anything wrong. I butchered anything.
You can always send us corrections later. We'll put it in the description.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, we do have a Facebook page. So we post a lot. It's the KBIC Natural Resources Department. You can follow us. We try to do weekly posts. We have Meet Our Staff Monday, Tuesday Teas, Wildlife Wednesday. And we're trying to fill in the other days of the week. But we got pretty strong on those couple of days of the week. So that's where you can find kind of like up and coming what's going on with our department.
You guys, if you go on there and search for our department, the KBIC Natural Resource Department, and then put in like wolf awareness, it should pull up like a bunch of posts that we posted in October about wolves and a lot of the stuff that we do surrounding the work, surrounding some of the outreach, and then just other stuff like traditional stories and, some stuff from Glyphwick, which is like basically like our treaty authority, I guess.
Yep. And then we also have a Facebook page, we have a web page, website. It is under construction right now. So you can search like KB Natural Resources and it'll take you to a website, and it's kind of unfortunate looking right now. So I don't know if you could really find any extremely useful information on there. But we always, people are welcome to reach out directly to us via phone or email. We're always happy to talk with folks or share information if there's anything specific that people are looking for.
We give tours of our hatchery.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff out here, Yeah,
we have a lot of stuff going on out here, especially in the summertime. We have a community garden. We have a huge restoration site along the shoreline, along the lake. Our fish hatchery. So it's really never a dull moment around here. So we welcome people to stop in and see us.
Absolutely. We're going to have all that. Yeah, we're going to have all that stuff. Yeah, we're definitely going to show up at some point. We'll show up at the door and knock. But yeah, anybody who's listening to this, we'll have that information in the description. So take a look at that. And I'll make sure that you guys, anybody who's listening, can reach out to Erin and Austin and find out all this information. Thank you both for joining Stephen and I. This was, again, extremely informative, and I just love learning about the history of stuff. So thank you guys for doing the work that you do and just continuing to be just a voice of reason and education out there. It's truly wonderful.
Thank you.
Magwitch.
Good fun.
You guys are great. How's to you all out there? And Stephen, I'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the Donate tab, and find out more information.